Welcome to Pod Bless Texas. I'm Kendall Scudder here at the Pod Bless Texas World Headquarters in Dallas, Texas. I told you we were going to be in a studio this week, guys. I didn't say it was this week, but I said we were going to be back in the studio, and we delivered. We're here in a studio, and I have great friends with us in the studio here today. Co-hosting with me today is a friend of the pod that you have met before, Alison Grinter-Allen.
Hi.
Attorney extraordinaire.
Thank you.
Is that your official title, attorney extraordinaire?
I think the extraordinaire is the official part. The attorney, I'm sometimes an attorney, sometimes a mom, always extraordinaire. So yes.
Well, I'm just thrilled that you're here and taking time away from being on the MSNBC, CNN, and Samantha Bee circuit.
This was my priority, 100%.
It should be. We're glad that you're here, and we have a very special guest. My state representative, someone who is arguably the best member of the Texas House of Representatives by a lot of people's standards, except for Republicans. And we're just absolutely thrilled to have him here. Representative, Congressman, Ambassador John Bryant.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Do we call you Representative, Congressman, or Ambassador?
Oh, Representative is the one I got most used to, so that's the best one.
I'm still calling you Congressman. We're just going to do
All
that.
right.
That's the answer I wanted.
All right.
It's been a pretty raucous week, guys.
That's been great.
Have you been watching the trial?
I have been totally glued to it. I have docket every morning, and so I don't get a lot of it, but whenever I'm in the car, whenever I'm off, whenever I'm not in the courthouse, my kids are sick of it, I'm streaming it constantly. It's fantastic.
It's really hard to watch because of Busby's spray tan, in my opinion.
You know, I don't know how deep you've dug into this, but his ads for his personal injury law firm are so extremely cringe, and there is no screeching eagle, but it's very close to that. And I mean, I love that. What you see on the floor is what you get in those videos. I mean, he is just exactly the personal injury lawyer mob consigliere that he is portraying, like for real.
Gotta love that authenticity. Now, Representative Bryant, when you were first a freshman in the Texas House in 1974, we impeached. It was the last time that there was an impeachment.
That's right.
Then you were a freshman again in the Texas House in 2022, and we impeached Ken Paxton. So who are we impeaching next year is my question for you.
Well,
do you have to be a freshman? Do you need to retire and come back, and then we can get
apparently
some of the rest
that's
of
what
them?
causes it to happen. Yeah. I do remember the first time around, and it was quite a big deal, even though it was just a local district judge. It wasn't a statewide official that was being impeached, but it was quite the drama. And the judges, Judge O.P. Carrillo's lawyer, was the former Attorney General Wagner Carr. And he actually came on the floor of the House and argued his case before the vote to impeach. I believe that before they tried him in the Senate that he resigned. I think that's what happened, because I don't have any memory of a trial in the Senate. It's been a long time ago.
Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, the same factions that were fighting down in the Rio Grande Valley, or South Texas, I should say, that ended up with Carrillo being impeached are still at odds today.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how long those political memories are, right?
Yeah.
How funny. So your first term back into the Texas House, I know you've been asked this question 1,000 times, but there's people listening who've probably not heard you ask this yet. What's the difference? What's the difference for when you first served in the 70s and 80s versus, and then you went to Congress and then you were an ambassador, versus when you come back now? What's the difference?
Well, the fundamentals of human beings in a legislative process, which is in our case, 150 people in one room from January until the end of May, the fundamentals are the same. What's different now is the partisan alignment. The Republicans have 86 seats. One they don't have temporarily because we kicked that guy out for misbehavior. So there's 85 seats to 64 Democrats, about 10 of whom rarely vote with us on the big issues. Sometimes we can get them. But it's a partisan alignment, and even though everybody smiles and is friendly and collegial on any big issue, it's going to be 85 Republicans plus whatever Democrats they can pick up against the rest of us. So we're in a minority. We are unable to win the big votes, and we have difficulty winning very many votes at all if it's a Democratic proposal. It's a different situation.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, it almost feels as if the entire legislative process now is, and this is from someone who obviously wasn't around then, right? But like, it just feels like the legislative process now drags so much. Like, you can't even work with the other side these days to get something accomplished because Republicans have their heels drug in so hard. Were there any folks at the legislature this cycle that you were surprised at how much you liked them?
Well, I was surprised that I liked everybody very much. I like the Speaker of the House. He's a Republican. I would not vote for him. I disagree with him fundamentally on nearly everything important. But he's a decent person. He sees the world his own way. He's a fair presiding officer. I've liked everyone there. I sit in the midst of a nest of Republicans. That decision as to where you sit is a kind of a luck of the draw situation. So, and I like those guys too, but I don't agree with them. We don't vote together. It's a very unusual dynamic. I'll make a speech about something. It's one of their major priorities against it, and I'll come back and sit down and say, hey, good job, made a good speech. Then they promptly vote against the position that I advocated. So everybody's very collegial, but the problem is that collegiality masks continued losses by Democrats on major fundamental issues, like a woman's right to choose, like basic health care decided by their doctor for transgender people, which is no business of the government, and certainly no business of the right wing that to such a great extent controls the Republican Party today. And I could give example after example. The repeal of diversity, and inclusion, or I should say law prohibiting any activity with regard to diversity and inclusion in any walk of life. We're speaking specifically of the college campuses right now. These are enormous setbacks. I mean, that was a great social move forward when we said, look, we're going to make sure that we have diversity. Not only is it morally right, but it's the best way to educate people. You want your students to be among a diverse group, a diverse population. So, and you want them to be taught by a diverse set of professors. Well, that's out the window now, and that's because Democrats continue to lose the votes in the Texas House and Senate.
How do you think we're doing with messaging on that? I mean, I hear a bunch of people on our side parroting back things like acronym of DEI instead of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. People talking about pro-choice versus pro-life, which is letting them frame the issues. I mean, how close do you feel we are to that breaking point where we stop using so many syllables and start telling Texans that clearly these folks are just trying to climb all up in your libraries, your classrooms, and your underpants all the time? Yeah. And that's not freedom. That's not what we're here for.
I agree with you, and I agree with you what you're saying about the use of acronyms, which the public doesn't necessarily know the meaning of. But the problem is much worse than that. It's refusal to speak out at all or take on these guys the way they attack us on a daily basis. When is the last time you read of a Democratic state senator or state House member calling out the governor for gross incompetence, or heard them call out the lieutenant governor, or jump on the Republican majority in the House, for example? You rarely hear it because too many of our members are focused on being pretty much in business for themselves. They want to be appointed chairman. They want to be given a vice chairmanship, which is meaningless. A chairmanship really has very little meaning because you're not going to be given a Democratic majority on your committee. So what's the point in the title? Hoping to keep the way clear to pass a passel of little bills that don't make much difference. So you give up your voice and you fail to be an advocate and to educate the public in return for a mess of pottage. It's something that doesn't even matter.
I mean, when you look at Congress, when you look at D.C., it seems like so much more acrimonious a place than the Texas legislature, but it's also getting a lot more attention and getting people talking more. Do you think that the collegiality is working against the conversation?
Well, the point is that the appearance of a lack of rancor is the price of that appearance is the lack of progress and the lack of being able to protect the progress already made. We pay a very high price for this appearance. You hear it said quite often, well, we're not like Washington. Well, I agree. And I served in Washington at a time in which you could get a lot done. I know what Washington is like. I was there when Newt Gingrich became Speaker. I know what a bad version of Washington is like as well. But just because you're polite to each other in the Texas House doesn't mean that everybody's working together on bipartisan legislation. We just passed an appropriations bill that did not include any additional funding for public education. Our independent school districts have not had an increase in funding for 10 years. So when I had a senior member, a Democrat, come to me and say, hey, you're being awfully critical. We have a way of doing this here. I said, well, let's talk
How's
about
that going?
Let's talk about the way of doing this and what it's meant for your poor school districts. It's meant they haven't had an increase in 10 years. All the increased funding has gone to charter schools. So that's just one example. I could go on. We're dead last in mental health. I mean, there's a high price that is paid so a few members can call themselves chairman. A few Democratic members can have the title of chairman or can strut around and act as like they're particularly effective. In fact, they are not effective on anything important. They're only effective on things that don't really make much difference to the public.
So in this legislative session, you kind of made waves for the points of orders that you were calling that would kind of render Republican bills useless and they weren't able to get them through. But where I think you made the most news was when you proposed the alternative tax relief plan. So we weren't live as a podcast at that time, but the tax relief plan came out from Republicans where they were only going to be giving those exemptions to homeowners. But you put out an alternative Democratic tax plan. Would you talk to us a little bit about what would have been in that if we could have gotten that passed?
Yes, we drafted a tax plan for Democrats after months and months of the Republicans in a high-profile fashion arguing among themselves about what property tax relief ought to look like without a single Democratic voice in the discussion. Now remember, there are Democrats on the House Ways and Means Committee, and there are Democrats in the Senate that could have spoken up. Nobody did. There was no voice whatsoever. So an ad hoc group of us came forward and offered an alternative to what they were doing. Remember, this surplus that's the source of funding for these tax cuts is a result of sales taxes that everybody pays. And yet no one was addressing renters, for example, who make up 38% of all Texans. That is to say 38% of all Texas households rent the premises that they live in. In my district, 114, right in the heart of Dallas, it's 57%. In Dallas as a whole, it's well over 50%. Well, why wouldn't a bill take into consideration those homeowners? No talk about them whatsoever. Perhaps more prominently considered was homeowners. Well, homeowners need property tax relief as well, for reasons we can go into in just a moment. Homeowners who are being taxed out of their homes because of the failure of the legislature to fund public education, even at a national average, needed relief. But $3.8 billion of all the relief given went to refineries and skyscrapers and commercial properties who were not in need of tax relief. The need was homeowners. So the Democratic alternative gave twice as much tax relief to homeowners as the Republican plan that passed, and it gave a substantial cash rebate to renters to make up for the fact that their rent had gone up so much as a result, among other things, of property taxes going up so much. And that was what the Democrats were all about, because that's what the public needed. Our constituents are not refineries and skyscrapers and these oligarchs who got so much tax relief from this bill. Our constituents are people, and that's where our focus should have been.
Yeah, and so they wouldn't even give that bill, the opportunity to be heard on the floor. So y'all tried to piecemeal it as amendments.
Right.
How'd that go?
Well, we offered it. We broke it into pieces, and we offered the amendment to double the tax relief to homeowners. It was voted down. We got about 51 votes for it. The rest were Republicans, and the Democrats typically vote with the Republicans. And we offered the proposal to give a cash rebate to renters, so they'd share in this bonanza of a surplus that's being given away in the form of tax relief. And it, again, got about 51 votes. So in election time, in the upcoming elections next year, I'm sure they'll be talking about who voted for that and who voted against it, because to vote for the plan we put forward would have been much better for homeowners and much better for renters.
So 64 Democrats in the House, right?
Yes.
And 51 votes for your amendments?
Yeah. I believe it was about 51.
I'm not great at math.
So
Is that? I think we've lost some. What's
13 Democrats?
Well, remember, this was the Speaker and the Republican team's bill, and so to vote against it would be to go against them. What's worse is enactment of this, the way they went about it, requires a constitutional amendment, which takes 100 votes. With 51 votes, we could have stopped the constitutional amendment and said, if you want to pass tax relief, then we want the following things in the bill to take care of our priorities, that is to say, homeowners and renters, as a condition of giving them the votes for the constitutional amendment. A number of us advocated that strategy, but we couldn't get the votes for it. It's, again, 20 years of being in the minority has caused our Democratic caucus to have adopted a lot of bad practices and a misunderstanding of their role in this process, which should be to stand up in every case for the voting public.
I guess here's what I don't understand. Is it a real difference in values that we're dealing with, or is it just PTSD? I mean, I grew up in Dallas. I understand the sort of desire to shrink away when Republicans start yelling. I mean, that gets pounded into us living here. Is it fear of retribution, or is it a real difference in values, do you think?
Well, I think it's not fear of retribution, it's fear of not being included when they hand out chairmanships.
Not sitting at the cool kids table?
Or the best.
Who's going to invite them to lunch?
Oh, we hate that.
Yeah. They want to be invited. They want to always be at the party, so to speak. Always be invited to the country club and be part of that.
That's gross.
You give up your voice when you do that. So I will point out to you, though, that many of these members were elected when that was already underway and assumed that was the way the business is done. Yeah. And they have good hearts. And I think we'll strengthen up and do better and better in the future. But it takes leadership to make that happen, and we've not had that kind of leadership.
Well, you've certainly been providing that leadership, and we're very grateful to have you do that. We have to take a really quick little ad break, and we'll be right back. Today's podcast is brought to you by Represent Texas, the official podcast, the official PAC of Pod Bless Texas. Represent Texas is a political action committee that raises funds to help Democrats all across the state of Texas that are fighting in really tough districts, and helps a lot of friends of our show that come through Pod Bless Texas. So if you would like to help support the good folks that come on this show, or really good Democrats that are fighting like hell across the state of Texas, you go to www.representtexaspac.org and make a contribution there and help the cause. Represent Texas PAC, fight like hell, help Democrats win. Okay. Now that we got that housekeeping out of the way, you have it's presumed that there's going to be a special session coming up in October once the Paxton trial, is done. And we call it a trial. It's just removal from office. The guy isn't going to a jail cell or anything. Yet. But assuming that all that's done at the end of September, they call a special session, and it is expected that he will be pushing school vouchers kind of as the single item there. What do you see as the Democrats' line? Or really not even the Democrats, because really it's Democrats and Republicans that oppose vouchers. So what do you see as the pro-public school line of defense in the upcoming special session?
Well, first of all, it needs to be made plain that vouchers or educational savings accounts, or whatever you call them, are all the same thing. They're a concept that originated at the time of the desegregation of our schools back in the 1950s as a racist scheme to allow white families to pull their kids out of school and put them into a private school and have the state pay for it. This idea of vouchers has a sordid history, and that should be pointed out. Every good-hearted person should be opposed to them for that reason alone. Republicans have brought them back. They managed to pass them in a number of states. Our line of defense so far has been rural Republicans combined with most Democrats to give us a majority to stop vouchers. Because in small towns, if you introduce a private school into that town, and that will happen because the people in the private school business are rubbing their hands together. They can't wait for vouchers to pass so they can get profit from it. The people in a small town and the small school district know that will undermine public education, undermine the ability to educate kids. It'll be the end of Friday night football. It'll change the community entirely. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but private schools really are just a big urban area thing, right? I mean, people only send their kids to private school so that they continue to live in the big city, but they don't have to send their kids to school with the big city folks, with the big sprawling urban development with people of color.
Right, that's correct. That's the current situation. So the rural representatives and their school districts don't want to see private schools introduced into rural communities because it'll undermine the whole operation of the local public school system. We're hoping that we can hold that coalition together. I'm very worried about it. We don't have every last Democrat. There are a few Democrats who are wobbly on this, and the Republicans are going to be under pressure from every right-wing group. And these guys, these right-wingers now, they're billionaires backing all of these right-wing think tanks. They're going to really put the heat on these Republican members, and I hope they'll hold fast. We'll see.
It seems to me that a real point of vulnerability is rural churches, right? Because they could start establishing schools. They could start flexing the power that they have in small towns to get state money into their coffer.
I agree. That is, if vouchers pass, I think that will be a significant vulnerability. And those who are ambitious right now to do that will be lobbying in favor of vouchers. But vouchers undermine the teacher retirement system as well, because as you pull money out of regular public education, reduce the student population. And by the way, we fund public schools based on average daily attendance, not enrollment. As you introduce vouchers and funds go out of the system, you're going to see a diminution in the financial base of our teacher retirement fund.
Well, and I mean, the problem in my mind, I mean, there's a lot of problems with school vouchers, right? They're just total garbage. But I mean, essentially you have people who are constantly like beating their chest about their conservatism and how they are big penny pinchers when they're not, and they always raise the deficit. But what they're doing is creating a new entitlement program. But it's an entitlement program that only rich folks can use, because the cash value of a voucher of $7,000 or whatever they choose for it to be, which usually hovers around $7,000, is nowhere near the average of $30,000 that it costs to put your kid to private school. And also, we're all capitalists, so I would assume we would understand that if you give rich folks a $7,000 coupon to put their kids in private school, all that's going to happen is those people's private schools are just going to go up by $7,000.
Well, probably so, but clearly you're not going to be serving the public interest. We have 5.5 million students. There are not anywhere near enough classrooms to take care of 5.5 million students on the private school universe. If you included Catholic schools and every freestanding, every religious school of any kind, and all the freestanding private schools, there's just not enough classrooms to do that, or even do 20% of that. The whole thing is an ill-conceived debacle. You give parents less than half of what it takes to go to a private school. What is going to happen with that money? Are we going to give it also to people that homeschool? Are we going to pay you to keep your kids out of the school system? Well, why would they not succeed at that? They've succeeded at every other right-wing scheme. This thing is a real threat to our public, to our way of life, I should say.
You know how I know this has nothing to do with helping parents?
How?
Because there's absolutely no movement to help the folks who are putting their kids into these private schools for daycare purposes. There's nothing to help these parents or to relieve that pressure on young families who are paying. Daycare is almost always the biggest bill a young family pays. Yeah. And there's children, I happen to know, are one of the most owned consumer goods here in Texas, and that is a real how do young families go to work and put their kids in childcare? It is impossible, and there's no political will to help those families, but there is political will for a solution that lacks a problem, and that is school-age kids.
Yeah, very well said. And if you read the papers today, federal funding for child care is expiring. Mm-hmm. And with a Republican majority in the U.S. House, even though the Democrats have a multi-billion-dollar proposal to keep the funding in place, it's not going to pass with a Republican majority in the House.
I mean, it's so frustrating. I hope that you guys are able to kind of stand guard there. You know, I know you can't name names because you have colleagues and stuff, but are there things that listeners and people here can do to try to make sure that we're protecting public schools? Because frankly, you know, I view this as the fight, right? I mean, public schools, particularly American public schools, are the single best tool for upward economic mobility on the globe, right? Since they were created by John Adams, I mean, they have lifted so many people out of poverty and given them opportunities to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? And if we lose funding for our public schools or get to a point where they are just completely diverting those funds out into private institutions, you create a two-tiered educational system, and working folks will never get a fighting shot. So this is the fight. And so what can we do in this fight to make sure that, you know, we're holding the line here?
Well, in this fight and many others like it, what we need are groups of active Democrats in every legislative district that constitute for themselves an accountability committee and sit on these Democratic members, including myself, and make sure that they're voting in the public interest. Not just on the obvious votes for which they're going to be held accountable in a primary, but on the procedural votes, on the efforts, for example, to stop a constitutional amendment until the Democrats can negotiate for their own priorities in the underlying bill. We need accountability committees that make sure that happens and that members can't escape their obligation to support the Democratic agenda because the public can't figure it out or is not paying attention.
Are you talking about something that looks like a scorecard?
A scorecard would be fine, but it's not so much the scorecard as it is the people. So, I mean, if a member of the House or any elected official knows there's 10 people that are actively paying attention and actively communicating with the voters back home, they're a lot more alert to how what they're doing is going to be reported. That goes for state senators as well. And, you know, the feds in Dallas, the funky East Dallas Democrats who've become so strong in my area, they pay so much attention. They're so active. In a way, they constitute that in our part of the city. We need that kind of activity everywhere that's paying attention from January to June, really paying attention all year round, making sure that the person that's been given the honor of running as a Democratic candidate votes for the progressive priorities of the Democratic Party.
Well, I know that there are a lot of people listening who are members of local Democratic clubs and parties. And so that's something I think folks definitely should consider. And it's something that's not us just begging for money, right? It's an opportunity for you to create accountability squads to hold your rep and other reps accountable. People, I think, would be shocked to know how few people actually reach out to their legislators. And so it probably would rattle them quite a bit if folks were paying attention. So thank you for that recommendation, Representative Bryant. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, it's a pleasure.
Texas. But you don't get to leave yet, because before you go, you have to play everybody's favorite segment. It's called Obsessed. That's where each of us will talk about one news story from the week, whether it was politics or it wasn't, that they've been completely obsessed with. And as always, we have to start this segment with the co-host, Alison Grinter-Allen. What's something this week you've been completely obsessed with?
So I have something that I've been absolutely obsessed with, and then I have a little kicker. The kicker, honestly, I don't think that we could have an honest podcast where we talk about things that are going on in Texas unless we mention Representative Murr's gorgeous mustache. Okay? I don't think that we can move past that without touching on the fact that we are really being put to shame as a party on our collective mustache game.
I mean, if you're into mustaches.
I mean, you know, there are a lot of give the fans what they want.
The guy looks like a portrait of someone from 1972.
I would say 1872. There are very fancy and complicated bicycles that are missing their rider and power lifter at the beach. But that having been said, what I really have been absolutely obsessed with this week, Kendall, is the Proud Boys. Yeah, aren't they great? So great.
I hope you're not obsessed in the way that you're going to join them.
You know, I think that I lack a few of the qualifications for membership, but one of the things I think that we really need to pay attention to.
You really opposed to swastika tattoos?
I am, but I think they're male only. I think
okay, gotcha.
I don't think they dig the ladies.
Part.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Mm-hmm. But that's all right. That's all right. What I'm concerned about is how law enforcement generally is viewing these folks. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and when my people get together and have a common sign or insignia and get together routinely for the purpose of creating crime and committing crimes, they are labeled as a criminal street gang. A criminal street gang is a label that gets you an enhancement under Texas law, and also it prevents you from carrying firearms legally.
Huh.
And for some reason, the Proud Boys, who, as you know, the FBI says come from, to a large extent, North Texas. We've got a lot of them. It's pretty embarrassing. The Proud Boys, who label themselves a criminal street gang, are not being treated like a criminal street gang. They are not being prevented from carrying weapons. And I'm not sure exactly what the difference is, because when I think of what the definition of a criminal street gang is, it fits exactly the Proud Boys. And for some reason, they're just not being prosecuted under gang laws. And I've been trying to think about it, and it's right on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't figure out exactly why. And I think that if law enforcement were to pay attention to this group as it is dangerous and use the laws that we have at our disposal, we could skip arguments in the legislature about common sense gun laws. We could move to restrict gun ownership and gun possession in this group, and people would be safer.
That's a really good thought, Alison Allen. That had never really occurred to me before, but it makes total sense.
Well, it's worth exploring. I mean, what would be better would be to elect a Democratic majority and pass common sense gun legislation.
Hey, what a concept.
I'm doing my part.
Did not
got my vote every time.
In any way.
Well, we didn't talk about that, not to go back to the interview, but you actually were the author of a pretty, or a sponsor of a pretty substantial gun control bill this cycle.
Well, it was one that had all the things that people talk about without going into all the details. But getting it out of committee to the floor was impossible. So when they brought a bill out that was tangentially related to guns and had a bunch of self-serving information in the preamble of the bill, I offered amendments to the preamble and said that guns are now the biggest killer of children in America, and right on down the line, which of course outraged them. They hadn't thought about somebody might offer an amendment to the preamble of the bill, the legislative
I love that.
findings, and they were voted down. But we had our moment. Talking.
They voted
about
down putting facts in the preamble of the bill.
That's right.
Fascinating. Good obsessed, Alison
Thank
Allen.
you.
Great
Yeah.
obsessed. Yeah. State Representative John Bryant. What's something this week you've been completely obsessed with?
I just finished reading a 650-page biography of James Madison by Ralph Ketchum, and it took a long time I kept putting it down and going back to it, but I finally got through it. But it's basically his life is a history of this founding of this country, and what I am obsessed with is how we just barely got created in the first place. We just barely won the Revolutionary War. We just barely got a constitution adopted, and we just barely survived all of these challenges to the workings of the Constitution. And when I think about Trump and I think about all of these Proud Boys you were talking about a minute ago, and how few people have really been willing to stand up against this guy, other than elected Democrats. And I just am obsessed with thinking about how close we came to losing what we have, and obsessed with wondering, are we going to continue to have people who will stand up? Because it's not going to stop. If you look at Germany and the loss of that great civilization to Hitler, the villains really were the people that wouldn't stand up along the way. There's always going to be bad guys, but are there going to be enough people who'll stand up? That's what I'm obsessed with this week.
It really is shocking, the number of Republican reps who just have no interest in preserving the democracy, right? I mean, like literally we have footage of them running in fear down the halls of the Capitol to seek shelter while the Capitol was being raided. Yeah. And yet here they are now pretending like nothing ever happened because I guess they had a donor or something that told them that they don't want them to do that. I mean, it's just outrageous. Why run for office if you don't even care enough about the republic to protect it? I
mean, even Pence won't really, condemn it in a full-throated way, and they were trying to kill him. So it's unbelievable, really.
Well, they're scared of the mob. I mean, yeah. I think they're the dog that caught the car. They're buoyed up by this group of folks, but they can't control them.
Yeah.
Well, they created the mob. They have to live with it. Unfortunately, we do too.
Yeah.
Good obsessed. State Representative John Bryant. Good obsessed. My obsessed today actually ties in really well with y'all.
Nice.
I go above and beyond to make sure that I don't learn the names of the people on January 6th who have been tried and are now sitting in jail as felons who will hopefully lose their rights to vote and to have guns. But there's one particular one from this week that I've been completely obsessed with, and that's the one that was tried this week and got 12 years and sobbed openly and loudly, begging for forgiveness. And I'm telling you, that's my new white noise machine. I'm copying it. I'm going to play it when I can't sleep at night. I'm trying to get something relaxing. I love it because there's nothing I love more than the tears of Nazis. I love it. I love it. That used to not be controversial. You used to be allowed to say that all the time. Actually, in the 50s, you probably could just punch a Nazi in the face and there wasn't an entire jury in the country that'd convict you. And these days, they're electing them to Congress.
Captain America did it like 400 times.
Absolutely.
We should each get at least one swing, right?
I think so. I mean, you should either get to take a swing at a January 6er or Ted Cruz, and you get to pick which one. No, just kidding. We do not.
That's Sophie's choice.
We actually do not recommend violence. I'm teasing. It's a joke. Jokes. But my point being that I am loving watching these January 6ers finally get their day in court. Every single one of them that are now sitting behind bars. And I'm glad that there's going to be consequences to taking up arms against the government, right? I mean, if you are going to try to raid and overthrow an entire branch of government, you should have consequences to that. Doesn't matter how the folks who've been paid off by the Koch brothers and Ferris Wilks out in West Texas want to spend it. They should have consequences. And I am obsessed with those consequences. And I love that type of crying.
Great obsessed. Great obsessed.
Thanks. That's what I've been obsessed with. And that was Obsessed! If you have something that you've been obsessed with, you should send us an email at info@podblesstexas. You might have that obsessed played on this show. Send us a video, send us an audio recording, or you can just write it and I'll read it. I'm just interested to know what you're obsessed with this week. Alison Grinter-Allen, State Representative John Bryant, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's
Great
start
to
with
be
John.
here.
John, if people wanted to continue to follow you, the work you're doing in the State House, I mean, the backbone that you've brought to the Democratic caucus, where could they go to follow you and do that?
Go on the line at John. Let's see, it's johnbryantfortexas.com.
There you go.
www.johnbryantfortexas.com, and you'll find out everything out that you need to know.
And it's got all your social media handles there. That's really great.
Yeah.
Alison Grinter-Allen, if people wanted to follow you, where could they go to do that?
I'm on all the socials at Alison Grinter, Alison Grinter, Grinter. I think we're all on Threads now, right?
We're
Are we
all on
giving up
Threads now.
Twitter? It's awful.
I tried to give up Twitter and people wouldn't. Why are you people still on Twitter?
Get off of it.
I got off of Twitter. I actually tweeted and I was like, I'm out. And I posted my Threads link and I was probably out for a solid month. And then people were kind of
drags you
like
back
on
in.
me for not being on Twitter.
The DMs, people. That's how people get to you. Anyway, I have it, but I'm not looking at it. The Twitter recently.
I'm only if I get a DM am
Yeah,
I
there you
getting
go.
on Twitter. Or X.
Yeah.
Good
No,
one.
I'm not saying that.
If folks wanted to follow me, they could go to all the socials at Kendall Scudder, or you could follow Pod Bless Texas at Pod Bless Texas, also on all the socials.
It's a great follow.
Now that I'm in the studio, I'm kind of broke, guys, and I need you to help me fund that. So go to our Patreon and chip back into your $5-10 that you used to do. Now that the podcast is back, we certainly need that so we can stay inside the studio, because I'm not looking to go into a poorhouse for a podcast.
It's so fancy here. I like it.
It is fancy here. The quality's great. The team's awesome.
Yeah.
We get good lights. Anyways, I really appreciate y'all taking time to come today.
Delighted to be here.
And so on behalf of myself, John Bryant, Alison Grinter-Allen, and the entire Pod Bless Texas team, y'all have a blessed week. We'll see you next week.